Brought to you by Knights of Awakening. This is the Labyrinth. Okay, so today's episode is going to be a little different than a past few ones. I've asked if anyone had any questions or thoughts to write in. And actually, on my business account, someone wrote in with a question. I asked, hey, do you mind if I do a Labyrinth video on it? So they said, fine, that'd be great. So that's what I'm going to do today, is answering a little bit of their question. I'm not going to name names. I'm going to make sure anything that identifies them is left out. What they're asking about primarily is my thoughts on how fantasy and fiction influence our perception when we project into the astral plane. Most people understand that what you have experience with is going to have a big impact on what you see in the astral. That isn't to say that you won't always find new things, or that you won't ever find new things in there that are outside of your realm of experience. But for the most part, things like the astral plane are a mental overlay for a spiritual experience. So you're dealing with energies and powers and travel that has to be relayed to your mind, to your body, to your ability to understand them through senses and through images that make sense to you. The astral, without any overlay at all, would be so alien to us, so foreign, so different, that we wouldn't be able to comprehend it. Most things spiritual would be very foreign to us if we experienced them without the filter of our senses. We utilize our senses for everything. Everything that we do and experience in magic, in mysticism, in spirituality has to do with our senses. So when people say, I felt a pull in this direction, well, that's your sense of equilibrium, of pressure, of direction. There's an orientation sense that goes with that, maybe a hot or cold sense, or an internal pressure sense. There's a number of different senses that play their part into when you feel one of these things. So it's important to note that as well, that nothing you experience in the mystical, nothing you experience in the spiritual will utilize something outside of your existing senses. And I always challenge people to say, well, that's wrong. Well, give me an example. And they never can, because they'll say, well, it feels like a pressure, but that's outside of you. I said, oh, so your spatial awareness, the same thing that lets you know where your hand is without any other biofeedback, is being pinged alongside your concept of pressure as an external point. Because the human body and mind works, in a sense, this isn't completely accurate, but it's good enough to explain it, as a core with projections, hands, feet. I'm not going to swing my feet up on camera, but you get the idea. That is how we address the sense of self. That's why you will be way quicker to shield your head, the way you perceive yourself here and here in your central organs, than you are to pull your hands out of the way of danger. This is that much more important to you. It's built in. Because of that, every experience that we work with has to translate into those kinds of senses. No one has yet to meet the challenge of explaining a sense without using any senses as examples or comparisons that are physical. That's because we can't. That is how we sense the world. So with that, when you project, everything has to work on that overlay of senses. Most of the time, we even build a spiritual body. Some of us build our spiritual bodies very much like our own. That's one of the things that I do. I don't allow self-deception. Other people, they build spiritual bodies that are what they would want to be. And still others try to get a little bit closer to what they feel the truth is by using other symbolizations such as wings or glowing energy around them. And these are all fine. None of this is bad or good. It simply is. It tells you more about your psychology than it does about the actual astral itself. But in this, they had asked how fantasy impacts this, and if hard fantasy, that's fantasy that has more limitations to it than, I should say, less fantastic fantasy, or less fantastical fantasy, impacts that, and if I think it's better or worse. And a bit of both is what I'm going to get into, especially for developing things like psychic abilities or energy work or things like being able to amplify your strength using key energy. How does this affect it when you're over there coming back over to here? So the first thing is, it does affect it. If all you partake and all you experience and what you put your primary focus on is hard fantasy, when you get into the astral, you're going to have a lot more hard limits. Most people can fly in the astral. Most people can do some various fantasy type things in the sense that what you would not be able to do here. Most spirits can too. Most spirits don't even think twice about the fact that they're moving through points of space, if you will. To them, it's simply movement of energy. When you have those hard limits, there's a good and a bad point to this. The good point is what you experience over there will translate to things over here more easily. So if you did do something like amplify your strength, you're going to feel and notice that. The way you experience that projection is going to give you a little bit more to take home over here. A little bit more that relates to things, especially if you're doing things like actually fighting on the astral. If you're fighting on the astral and you have made such a hard limit as to what you will perceive, you've trained your mind to perceive things as you would in the physical realm, then learning to dodge a punch over there while it won't equate perfectly over here will improve the ability to dodge a punch. This is written about in imagery techniques and things like that for martial arts, where a person goes over the methods in their head a million times over when their body can no longer train to keep their reflexes sharp. In this instance, though, it's working along with other forces that are being represented, other entities, intelligences as well. So that's the plus side, is some of what you bring back over in terms of functional abilities or learning to use things like psychic senses. It's going to definitely have a benefit to you. Now the downside, because there's always an up and a downside to anything. The downside to this is that things you might deal with over there, that you would have intricate ideas and methodologies that represent energy patterns more easily and quickly, you may not be able to reproduce. So for instance, the concept of a binding. If you use a hard fantasy setting, I'm looking over at the questions to make sure I'm hitting on some of this. If you use a hard fantasy setup within your mind and you use that as inspiration, that's all the media you partake of. You don't let yourself address any other books or anything else. You project over. You find that things like flight are impossible, but swords still cut. In fact, swords cut better than they probably should now. Swords will cut through like rocks and Buicks and stuff, and it's hard fantasy. It's not complete reality. Then if you have to bind something, you're going to have to use chains. And you're not just going to be able to raise your hands and make chains. No. Now you're going to have to fashion those chains. Now it's not going to be enough that you gather energy and feel it moving and all of those things. You're going to have to do that and then instill it in a set of chains. So on the fly, that makes that very difficult. Makes it very solid. Makes it the equivalent of doing a long-term ritual for binding. But it makes it very difficult. Makes it very time-consuming. And in the middle of a conflict, you're cutting yourself off from your ability to convert energy into mind, into thought, and then into form over there that represents something that is definite, even though the interpretation, I see chains, and the being that is giving me a problem sees walls. Well, regardless, they still get bound. They still get locked and restricted. If I've got to use a low fantasy setting, as they call it in the old days, or a hard fantasy setting, I don't know that I would be able to bind them. I guess I could wrestle them to the ground, put them in a headlock, and subdue them. Maybe I would have rope or chain available to me, but I wouldn't be able to just produce it. I would have to bring it. I would have to go and find it. Which means I'm restricting some of my power that I can express out there. The other side of that is beings may not be as limited. If you have something that is truly strong, it may force a bridge in that gap for imagery. And I'm going to go to the next email to make sure I'm not hitting on anything, or make sure I'm not missing anything that I should be hitting on. With that, I might not have access to all of my abilities that I actually have here. And What I mean by that is I can take a rune, visualize it, pour energy into it, and then project it towards a task here, and then get a result within my short-term result area is in minutes now, and my long-term is generally hours to days for things that I use my runes for. So that's great. But at the same time, that's not going to translate over there because that's influencing probability to get a result over here. You're fighting something that's an immediate. Okay, dragons generally don't roam around over here and cause problems. At least not the kind that I would need to chain up with chains. If you have something big enough that it's going to be worth representing as a full-size dragon, you're still limiting yourself to this body, to this form, to the projection of that. Yeah, you may be limiting yourself to a really good sword, but what if you're trying to just bind it and stop it? What if you're trying to talk to it? What if, surprise from me, Mr. Combat, you're looking for the peaceful solution, and you're saying, well, I need to bind it first and try to find a peaceful solution, and you're like, I shall bind it with, crap, my hands, and you take your necklace off and try to tie a dragon up with it. Because the logical mind is now acting as too much of a filter, you can't really pull your full power out into it. That dragon is going to beat you into the ground, and you're going to get up, maybe. You might even wind up deprojecting, being forced back into your body and being like, well, that was bad, and sustain injury from it. That's the other thing, is the more realistic you make it, the more grounded, the more you are tying it to the body here, which is great if you're trying to interact with an entity over there. You're trying to feel touch, you're trying to feel sensations from them. But it really sucks if you're in a fight. Because the more grounded you are to your body as it is, the more likely you are to have a rebound into it. So then that becomes a problem as well. And of course there are middle grounds to this. And then there is also an understanding that if you're able to do too much with no effort and no feedback, you're not going to get anything out of it. I once ran into a situation where a student of mine was being attacked by someone. This was years and years back. And I decided to step in because I wasn't having it. They were getting choked. So I said, I'll step in, and I'm going to have to explore this in the astral because whoever or whatever's doing this, it's doing it at a distance. And I had a feeling like I was being watched. So I projected in the astral, and I made it a point through the online groups that I was in to brag up my inability to fly easily in the astral. I didn't ever mention, or if I did, I downplayed the fact that I had mastered the skill, but I made it a point to make statements and to stay on this idea that when I would try to fly in the astral, if I went to move fast, I would have no control, because it was a problem early in my training, and I was kind of discussing it, hoping maybe I would help someone out, give them some tips if they were having that problem. So when I projected, I made myself look like the biggest idiot that I could, and I used my environment from my home as a surrounding. That way I tied me, whoever was scrying or looking in whatever method or methodology that they were ascribing to, would be hitting on things that they would be familiar with if they were using Google Maps or things like that, or if they had some idea of the area, or if they were able to really lock onto my body itself. So I used that as my baseline for my projection, and I blasted from one side to the other until I could sense them. And then when I sensed that they were watching and that they had felt secure enough that I was too big an idiot to see them, I stopped having that problem, and I went from about a mile away from where they were at to being right in front of them, grabbed them by the throat, and proceeded to beat on them. Now, the point that I'm getting to, this is not a brag. I'm Norse. I'm allowed to brag, but hey. But as I was hitting them, this person was a very good illusionist. So good that I couldn't feel the rebound through my hands. So, being some of the imagery that I like, or anime-type imagery and energy blast-style imagery, I threw them to the ground, and I fired a blast wave at them. And it hit, and I didn't feel the rebound in my palms. Up until then, sparring with beings that were willing to spar, training on my own, even just going up to a mountain in the astral and hitting it, I always felt a rebound, a recoil. I wasn't feeling any recoil. The only time I wouldn't feel recoil was in my early phases when I wasn't generating enough energy that it mattered. Wow, that's interesting. No recoil. They must be really strong. I thought they were just shrugging it off. Okay, I'll hit them harder, because that's how you solve that. So I hit harder, and this escalated about a dozen times until finally the hood that this figure was wearing kind of blew back, and I could see the face of the person, and then they disappeared. They no longer wanted to be in the conflict. Knowing the person's face, I contacted them thinking that this great illusionist was imitating them. And I said, dude, you better make sure that no one's using your signature, because this is what I dealt with. So they then launched this massive apology to the group, begged my forgiveness. I contacted them. I said to them, look, I was young and stupid once. What's going on? Because they were young and stupid. They'd lost people in their life, and they explained it. They had had a rough time, and they were doing this as a way of acting out and hadn't really thought it through. And I said, okay, I get that, but why did you stop then? You seemed like you were holding your own against me. If this was something where I knocked sense into you, how? And so I didn't feel like I'd landed a hit. They said, well, most people, if I get hit and I make it so they can't feel that they hit me, they stop because they think it's ineffective. You don't stop. You just keep going. And I said, well, yeah, I just figured eventually I'd hit hard enough. And he says, you had no concept that there was a limit to how hard you might be able to hit. And I stopped and thought about that for a minute. I said, no, why would I have a concept of a limit like that? I'm in the Astral. I can gain more energy at will. I can continue to raise my energy. It takes time. It takes focus. But why should there be an upper limit? This is kind of the point that I'm getting at with this. That's not plausible in a hard fantasy setting. You are at your maximum. You can't get any stronger. You can't push any harder. You can't draw energy in, raise energy up. And as someone who's an expert illusionist now has the ultimate power with you. An illusion is a core part of a lot of hard fantasy. The ability to make you see things you don't see. Minor magic, they call it. So it's a weakness over there, but over here it's useful. And it also has its use when you're dealing with certain things in which you are not seeking a battle for victory's sake. So for training purposes, for making yourself better at it. It is fantastic, and it's fantastic for journey where you want better sensation and stronger sensation, because it is closer to your physical body's normal sensory inputs. It becomes a lot more useful at that point. So even then, you can go into complete realism where everything is an analog for over there. And again, that's great until the representation of this analog is powerful enough. Using the dragon example, and it looks as a person does to your eye, but a person that cannot be thrown, that cannot be lifted, that cannot be hurt. Because you have no bigger way of projecting it at that point. You've now, in that limitation, made it completely unstoppable. Because you have no way of overcoming that limitation through tactic or method. So that limitation then becomes an issue there. But it also, again, it becomes very advantageous for communicating. It becomes very advantageous for getting true answers. It becomes advantageous for having better interactions. So outside of combat or dealing with negative situations, it's fantastic, and I do recommend it. Let's see if I missed on anything. It's not bad either to seek out realms that are like that. And this is the other thing, is if you just do realm journeying. So break the astral into more than the limited ideas that a lot of people have of it. When I say astral, I'm talking about any realm that's not here when you project, because I don't buy into there are 8 realms, there are 800 realms, there are 8,000 realms, there are 8 billion realms above ours. No. I believe that there's a variance, that it's like a kind of synchronization of vibration. God, I hate myself because I'm using science terms for it. I hate when people do that. So should I say then it is a resonance, some other science term, of consciousness? In the same way that two notes in music, if they resonate close enough, would sound indistinguishable, but there may be differences. So it's not pure resonance. So I'm going to use a music term because I don't want to use a science term because I feel that it's like me trying to say my way is better than your way and I know everything, which I don't. But you come to me, you get my view. You know, that's the way of life. So my view is that we put our resonance, not necessarily raise or lower it, but we put it in a kind of harmony with another place, and that's part of how we do journey work. And when we do that resonance with our consciousness, that projects us there. Project meaning we are still here. We're still locked into the physical on some level, but we're using the overlay. There are realms that if you're just projecting it and you're making a complete blank of your mind, you're getting rid of that preconceived anything, there are going to be realms where flight is easy. There are going to be realms where flight is impossible. Very real realms have very real repercussions, and if you were to die in one of those real realms, you would take injury here. If you were to become injured in one of those real realms, it could have some repercussion here, so there's danger there, but the other side of that is skills that are gained in those real realms will transfer at least in memory, if not muscle memory, but at least in knowing, hey, I did this there and that worked, maybe it'll work here, over here. Likewise, if those realms provide some degree of interaction with the mystical beyond the fact that you can project into them, you should be able to then expect to learn things like certain ritual practices in them, or to find associations for things that are similar. But those associations may be very personal for you at that point because they may not be accepted by the greater world over here. You may be right, we may be wrong, but no one's going to take your journey as the de facto for that. We're not going to be like, oh yeah, that person's got the answer, because we've got bodies of evidence that we rely on that create our reality for over here. So I don't know if that answers all of it. It's a lot to answer. Those types of realms might be more comfortable for some people, and that's fine. There is nothing wrong with how you do anything in magic for the most part. That is to say, so long as you're doing things. There are people that can cast a spell in 5 minutes and get good results, but when they do that, they have years of training behind it, or they have massive amounts of natural energy, or they do other things to keep their energy levels high, or they have something that makes it work that is beyond just saying a funny phrase and waving their hands. So for the most part in magic, so long as you've got a support system built into what you're doing that helps make what you're doing work, everything's acceptable. When it comes to projection, there are no good right answers. There are a lot of people who make a lot of money, spend a lot of time telling you that there are right answers, their way is the only way, and everyone else is wrong. And my code of ethics doesn't allow me to say anything mean about those people. It only allows me to say that I'm not one of them. Now, you may have noticed, as the show is going to come to a close here, that this was a little bit different. I took my time with the topics a little bit more. This is the kind of labyrinth episodes that you can expect to find when we post to YouTube first. And then, of course, it'll be shared all over Facebook. I tend to be a little bit more on topic with these, partially because I'm not watching for chat. I'm not watching for names to scroll in. I have no timer at the top that is making me infinitely aware of how long I've been there or how long people are viewing it, and it's a different type of beast. These videos will be a little bit more informative. Like I said, they'll usually show up here first. I might be able to dual upload it. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But I want to thank you either way. Remember to like, to share, to subscribe if you like this, if you want to share it. If you don't like it, then you probably don't want to like it. So don't. You can put the dislike button. I'm cool with that. I don't know if there's a way for you to not share, as in like unshare, reduce the number of shares that are out there. But if you dislike it that much, lobby for its removal. And if you're subscribed and you were like, wow, this video is terrible, then unsubscribe, if you don't want to be on the channel. But if you do like it, you want to get the word out, you like to see more of this, then, spread the word out. We're doing this with an offshoot channel from the Knights of Awakening. I highly recommend you check out the Knights of Awakening channel for the videos that are being done over there. We wanted to kind of split this off. A lot of people were having confusion as to why the Labyrinth had a lot of very unmagic related things. They thought the Labyrinth was the Knights of Awakening only, or they thought the Knights of Awakening was the whole of the Labyrinth. It is simpler to have it on a separate channel, and so that when you go looking for magical and mystically related things, you know that you can find it here, and you get what you're looking for in the immediate. Beyond that, I thank you very much for joining us, and as always, awaken the night within.